I woke up to find Daniel holding my iPhone directly over my face, the screen glowing blue in the darkness of our bedroom. His hand was steady, deliberate, and the phone was positioned at an angle that made my stomach drop before I even understood what I was seeing. My first instinct was confusion, then anger, then something worse. The sickening realization that he'd been doing this while I slept, and I had no idea for how long. "What the hell are you doing?" I sat up so fast my head spun, and Daniel jerked the phone away like he'd been caught stealing. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there in his boxer shorts, barefoot on our hardwood floor, holding my phone like it was evidence at a crime scene. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "Ashley, I can explain," he finally said, and those 5 words told me everything I needed to know. There was no innocent explanation. There never is. I snatched the phone from his hands, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The screen showed nothing unusual, just my lock screen, a photo of us from last summer at Cape May. But that didn't matter anymore. The trust was already shattered. 3 years earlier, life had looked completely different. We'd bought the house in Westfield, New Jersey, on a perfect spring morning in 2021. It was a 1970s colonial with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and a yard big enough for the golden retriever we'd been talking about for years. The realtor, Patricia Chen, had smiled at us from the driveway as we pulled up, and Daniel had squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "This is it," he'd whispered. "This is our place." The asking price was $480,000. We'd put down $80,000 in savings, money we'd scraped together from both our jobs, bonuses, and a small inheritance from my grandmother. The bank approved us for a mortgage at 3.8% interest, and I remembered feeling like we'd won the lottery. 30 years of payments, yes, but 30 years in our own home, a place where we could build something real. Daniel worked in pharmaceutical sales. He traveled 3 days a week, which paid well but kept him on the road. I was a marketing manager at a tech startup in Newark, with a salary just shy of $85,000 a year. Together, we made it work. More than work, we thrived. Our combined income was just over $190,000, which in Jersey was solid middle-class comfort. Not rich, but secure. We'd met 7 years earlier at a friend's wedding in Atlantic City. He was best man, I was a bridesmaid, and he'd spent the entire reception making me laugh while his date sat at another table, clearly irritated by his attention. He'd walked me to my car at the end of the night, and I remember him saying, "I'm going to regret this for the rest of my life if I don't ask for your number." I'd given it to him immediately. For the first 3 years, everything felt like the honeymoon phase that never ended. He left me notes in my lunch bag before his sales trips. I'd surprise him at his favorite coffee shop on Watchung Avenue. We talked about kids, maybe 2, we'd agreed, a boy and a girl. We talked about where we'd vacation, Europe someday, Costa Rica the year after. We made plans like people who believed the future was something we could control. The house became the centerpiece of those plans. We painted the master bedroom a soft sage green. I picked out new kitchen cabinets, white shaker style with brushed nickel hardware. Daniel built raised garden beds in the backyard for vegetables. We hosted Thanksgiving dinner our first year there, my mother sitting at our new dining room table with tears in her eyes because her daughter had made it. She'd made it. "I'm so proud of you," she'd said, squeezing my hand while Daniel carved the turkey. We got the dog in the spring of 2022, a golden retriever puppy we named Scout. Daniel was the one who'd insisted on the name, and he was the one Scout followed everywhere, even though I was the one who actually trained him and took him to obedience classes every Saturday morning. But Daniel didn't seem to mind. He'd just smile when Scout chose to sleep at the foot of Daniel's side of the bed. My mother lived 20 minutes away in Springfield, and she'd started coming over for Sunday dinners. My best friend, Jennifer, and her husband, Marcus, lived 3 blocks down, and we'd fall into a rhythm of barbecues and board game nights. Daniel had his own friends, a crew of guys from college who'd all ended up in North Jersey, and they'd gather at our place to watch football on Sundays during the season. His mother, Karen, called every Wednesday without fail. Everything was exactly as I'd imagined it when I was younger, working late nights at the startup, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Hoboken, wondering if this kind of life was actually possible for someone like me. But there were small things, now that I thought back on it. Things I dismissed at the time as nothing. Daniel's phone would light up with texts while we were eating dinner, and he'd glance at it quickly, then put it face down on the table. When I'd ask who it was, he'd say, "Just work," and I'd accept that. Sales could be unpredictable. Clients needed things at odd hours. He'd started going to the gym more frequently, which I'd encouraged because I wanted him to be healthy. But he'd always shower there before coming home, which meant he'd come through the door already clean, his hair still damp. Sometimes I'd catch a whiff of cologne that wasn't the one I'd bought him, but I'd think, maybe he grabbed something at the gym. It's not a big deal. He'd been more distant about his phone, too. He used to leave it on the kitchen counter while he showered or cooked. Then one day, he started taking it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom. When I'd ask to use it to check something, directions, a recipe, a phone number, he'd hand it over quickly, but always seem relieved when I gave it back. I'd mentioned this to Jennifer once while we were walking Scout around the neighborhood. "Do you think it's weird?" I'd asked, trying to sound casual. She'd looked at me sideways, her dark ponytail swinging as she turned her head. "Is he acting weird in other ways?" "No," I'd said immediately. "No, he's great. He's just attached to his phone, like everyone else." "Then I wouldn't worry about it," she'd said, but there was something in her tone that suggested she was being nice rather than honest. That had been 8 months ago, around the time when Daniel's job situation had started to change. His company, Meridian Pharmaceuticals, had been acquired by a larger conglomerate. There'd been restructuring, talk of layoffs, uncertainty about his position. He'd been stressed about it, which I understood. We had a mortgage, we had a dog, we had plans. "It's going to be fine," I told him, trying to sound confident. "You're one of their top performers. They'd be stupid to let you go." He hadn't been let go. Instead, he'd been promoted. Regional Sales Director for the Tri-State area. 30% raise, a company car, an expense account. He'd come home that evening with a bottle of champagne, and we'd sat on our porch swing while Scout napped at our feet, and he'd told me that this was it. This was the breakthrough we'd been waiting for. "We can pay off the mortgage in 15 years instead of 30, he'd said. "We can take that trip to Europe next summer. We can start thinking seriously about kids." I'd kissed him, tasting the champagne on his lips, and I'd felt so lucky, so grateful, so completely blind. That was when he'd started traveling more. The promotion meant more client dinners, more conferences, more time on the road. He'd be gone Monday through Friday some weeks, coming home only for weekends. I'd fill those weekdays with work, with Scout, with Jennifer, with my mother's Wednesday calls asking how things were going. "Everything's great," I'd always say. "Really great." And I'd meant it. Everything was great. Or it seemed to be. Or I'd convinced myself it was, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. Because I had a house and a dog and a husband who still kissed me goodbye in the morning, even if he was doing it while looking at his phone. Until that night, when I woke up and found him holding my iPhone over my sleeping face in the darkness, and I realized that everything I thought I knew was a lie. I pulled my phone back and immediately opened the photo library, hands shaking so badly I could barely swipe. My recent photos showed nothing unusual, just pictures of Scout, a few screenshots of work emails, some snaps from Jennifer's birthday dinner last month. But I knew. The way Daniel's face had gone pale, the way his jaw clenched when I looked at him, I knew he'd been trying to do something to my phone. "Show me your phone," I said, my voice steady in a way I absolutely did not feel. "Ashley, come on. You're overreacting. I was just..." "Show me your phone." He didn't move. He stood there in his boxer shorts, and I watched him make a calculation behind his eyes. The kind of calculation a person makes when they're deciding whether to fight or surrender. He surrendered. He pulled his phone from the nightstand and held it out to me, but not before I caught the flash of hesitation, the split second where he considered not giving it up. The lock screen was a photo of us at some corporate event, both of us smiling at the camera. I opened it with the passcode I'd always known, his mother's birthday, March 17th. The first thing I saw was an app I didn't recognize, not iMessage, not WhatsApp, something called Signal. My stomach dropped. I opened it and there were hundreds of messages. Hundreds. With a number I didn't recognize, prefaced by the name K. The first message was from 6 months ago. Miss you already. The responses were worse. Can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? I love you. And Daniel's replies, soon, I'll figure it out. Don't tell anyone. She suspects nothing. I read through them standing there in the darkness, the blue light of the phone illuminating my hands, my fingers, the ring on my left hand that suddenly felt like a prop from someone else's life. Dates, times, hotel names, a whole parallel existence laid out in perfect text threads. How long? I asked, though I wasn't sure I actually wanted the answer. Daniel's face had gone from pale to gray. He looked like a man watching his house burn down. Ashley, How long? 2 years, he whispered. 2 years. Not months. 2 years. We'd been married for 7 years. We'd bought this house 3 years ago. For 2 of those 3 years, while I was planning Thanksgiving dinners and walking Scout around the neighborhood and going to work and making a life with him, he'd been building another one with someone else. I walked to the bathroom and threw up. I didn't even make it to the toilet. I just leaned over the sink and heaved until there was nothing left, my whole body convulsing. When I finally straightened up and looked at myself in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Her face was blotchy and wet. Her eyes were wild. I heard Daniel in the bedroom behind me, on the phone now. I caught fragments. No, she found out. No, I don't know what to do. She's in the bathroom. He was calling her. He was calling her while I was falling apart. I came back out of the bathroom and looked at him standing there in the darkness, phone pressed to his ear, and something inside me crystallized into pure, cold fury. I grabbed my keys from the nightstand and my purse from the chair. "Where are you going?" he asked, lowering the phone. "Away from you." I drove to Jennifer's house at 2 in the morning. I don't even remember the drive, just the feeling of my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. When I got to their place, I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, trying to figure out how to explain what had happened, how to say out loud that my marriage was a lie. Jennifer answered the door in her pajamas, took one look at my face, and didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside and held me while I fell apart on her couch. By the next morning, she'd already called her divorce attorney, Linda Morrison, and gotten me an emergency appointment for that afternoon. By that evening, Linda was reviewing the signal messages on my phone and nodding grimly. "This is solid documentation," she said, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of expression that suggested she'd seen every variation of human betrayal. "He's been openly admitting infidelity and deception in writing. That's going to matter in terms of custody and asset division." "We don't have kids," I said numbly. "But you have the house, you have assets, and you have grounds for divorce based on adultery." She looked at me over her glasses. "In New Jersey, that matters." I spent that night back at Jennifer's place. The next morning, Daniel called 47 times. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went home while he was at work. He still had his job, still had his routine, still had his other life, and I packed 2 suitcases of my own clothes, important documents, and photos. I left my wedding ring on the kitchen counter. When he came home that evening, he called me immediately. "What the hell, Ashley, what is this? Your ring is on the counter. Your clothes are gone. Talk to me." "My attorney will be contacting you," I said quietly, and hung up. The next week was a blur of legal paperwork. Linda filed for divorce on the grounds of adultery. She filed for temporary spousal support. Daniel's salary was higher than mine now, and she argued I'd sacrificed career advancement to support his. She filed for an equitable division of the house's equity. We'd paid off about $80,000 of the original mortgage over 3 years, so the house's equity was split between what we'd paid and what the property had appreciated. Linda was aggressive, calculated, and unapologetic about it. "He made his choices," she'd said when I expressed concern about asking for so much. "Now he lives with the consequences." Daniel tried to negotiate. He sent messages through his attorney saying he wanted to work things out, that he'd made a terrible mistake, that he was willing to do whatever it took. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because every time I thought about him holding my phone over my face while I slept, trying to access my location or my messages or God knows what else, I felt sick. Jennifer's mother helped me find an apartment in Newark, a one-bedroom place that was smaller and less impressive than the house in Westfield, but it was mine. Just mine. I signed the lease with my own money, the emergency fund I'd kept separate, which Daniel didn't even know about, $12,000 in a savings account that had saved my life. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Daniel didn't fight the adultery claim. There was no point. The woman's name was Catherine, K from the messages, and she worked for another pharmaceutical company. She was 31 years old. She had an Instagram account that showed her at restaurants and bars and on trips to Miami and Puerto Rico, places where Daniel had been, based on his travel schedule. I found out through Jennifer, who'd done some light stalking on my behalf, that Catherine had been following Daniel's company's social media accounts for 2 years. They'd met at a pharmaceutical conference in Atlantic City. The irony of that wasn't lost on me. 3 months into the divorce proceedings, Daniel's company did another restructuring. He lost the regional director position, the promotion that had started everything, and went back to regular sales. His salary dropped by almost 40%. He sent Linda a message saying he couldn't afford the spousal support she'd requested. Linda's response was to file for a larger portion of the house's equity to compensate. He made 30% more for 2 years, she explained to me in her office, the same office where we'd first met. During those 2 years, he was also committing adultery and potentially fraudulently obtaining assets while being unfaithful. The house is the marital asset. You're entitled to it. The final divorce decree came through 6 months after I'd left. I got the house. I got 40% of his 401k from the years we'd been married. I got temporary spousal support for 2 years, though that seemed increasingly irrelevant given his job situation. Daniel got visitation rights that he'd never asked to exercise, and he got to move to an apartment in Hoboken, where Catherine had been living the whole time. On the day the divorce was finalized, I stood in the kitchen of the house, my house now, the papers said so, and I called my mother. "It's done," I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come to dinner on Sunday. I'll make your favorite, and you're going to tell me everything." That Sunday, sitting at my mother's dining room table, surrounded by the kind of comfort food that only a parent can provide, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not the angry, shocked tears from that first night, but the deep, exhausted tears of someone who'd been holding it together long enough. "You're going to be okay," my mother said, squeezing my hand. "You know that, right? You're stronger than you think." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that I could rebuild something from this, that the house and the legal victory and the separation meant something beyond just survival. It took 6 months for me to stop waking up in a panic, convinced I could feel Daniel's presence in the house. It took a year before I could look at photos of us without feeling like I was looking at a stranger's life. It took 18 months before I went on a date with someone new, a man named Marcus, no relation to Jennifer's husband, who worked in IT and didn't have a complicated relationship with his phone or his honesty. But the house remained. My house. The one I'd picked out the shutters for, the one I'd painted sage green, the one my mother had cried about with pride. I refinanced the mortgage in my own name, which took every bit of financial capital I had, but it was worth it. Because every month when I paid that mortgage, I was paying for something that was entirely mine. Scout lived with me, of course. Daniel never asked for visitation. He moved to Los Angeles with Catherine about 2 years after the divorce, when she got a job offer. I found out through Facebook. He didn't tell me himself. I never found out exactly what he'd been trying to do with my phone that night. I've had years to speculate. Was he trying to access my location? Check my messages? Set up some kind of tracking? I'll never know. Linda said it didn't matter legally, that the infidelity was enough, that I should stop trying to understand the psychology of a man who'd already shown me exactly who he was. She was right. Understanding didn't change anything. It didn't give me back the 3 years of planning a future with someone who was building a different future with someone else. It didn't erase the humiliation of being the last to know, the wife who didn't notice her husband was living a double life while she was training their dog and planning Thanksgiving dinners and telling her best friend that everything was great. But it did teach me something. It taught me that the life you think you have can disappear in an instant, that trust is fragile, that people can look you in the eye and lie with such perfect consistency that you start to doubt your own instincts. And it taught me that even when everything falls apart, even when the house that was supposed to be forever becomes a reminder of your own blindness, you can still rebuild. You can still own something. You can still be yours. 3 years after that night, I stood on the porch of my house, still sage green walls, still white shutters, still the same wraparound where Daniel and I had sat on the swing and talked about our future. And I realized I'd stopped thinking about him. Not entirely, not completely. But when I did, it was with the kind of detachment you feel about an old acquaintance, someone whose life you'd briefly intersected with, but who no longer had any claim on your present. Scout was older now, his muzzle graying, but he still followed me everywhere. Jennifer and Marcus still came over for barbecues, though Jennifer had stopped asking if I was okay and started asking what I wanted to cook. My mother still came on Sundays, though now I was the one making dinner, and I'd learned to trust my instincts again, which was perhaps the most valuable thing I'd gained from the wreckage of my marriage. Because when Daniel held that phone over my sleeping face, some part of me had known. Some part of me had always known, and I'd chosen not to listen, because listening meant destroying the life I thought I had. But the life I thought I had was already destroyed. I was just the last one to know about it. The night he tried to access my phone while I slept was the night I started taking my life back, and that, it turned out, was the only happy ending I actually needed.